I'm very excited to have my esteemed panelists here, Janelle Burnham from CVRx, Bryan Phillips from Inspire Medical, and Wendy Cusick from Connections Medical. Just a couple comments before we jump into it. If you smelled something during the program, that's beer meat being made. I know that because I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is where Old Style and Special Export, if you remember those beers, that's where that's made. And I remember smelling this like as a kid. I just thought it was normal for your town to smell like that. Also, just thanks to Charlie and Karen, they've really been the ones that put the food together and have been making everything running really well today. So thanks to them, and thanks to the whole team. I have the luxury of just showing up, and Daria and Amanda, everyone doing such a great job. Thanks for that. We're gonna have a happy hour after, and it's right outside this room. Karen was just telling me we also have a patio out here. Thank you, Charlie. And so mingle, talk to the person next to you. We also we have reserved from 4 to 6. Now, I don't know if anyone needs to be here that long, but I'll have to wheel you out. But, and that's kind of outside where it's sort of indoors, outdoors, downstairs. So it is a nicer day. Thankfully, it stopped raining. And then finally, Daria, you're going to announce some Cahoots results after right when we finish up. And so for the local folks here, you'll get some prizes. And very lastly, you can download the slides right now online. I know that was mentioned earlier, but Charlie's also going to do a recap and follow up after the program, so they'll be emailed to you. So if you want the slides and a recap of the program and videos and all kinds of things, that will be emailed to you from Charlie. So without further ado, I'll jump right into it. And I have the first question here for you, Janelle. And maybe before we do that, you all have your mics. Why don't you briefly introduce yourselves to the audience?
So I'm Janelle Burnham. I'm currently general counsel at CVRx. It's a small device company in Brooklyn Park. I met Mark in or around 2012. And he was like, I was working at a dental company, and he's like, you should get into compliance. And so that was interesting, and it laid a nice and fascinating path. So I'm grateful for that, and privileged to be here today, and I love getting together with peers. So looking forward to talking to you. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Good afternoon. My name is Bryan Phillips. I'm General Counsel, Chief Compliance Officer at Inspire Medical Systems. Happy to be here amongst such esteemed panelists. Janelle, your story is interesting about having met Mark. I met Mark a couple of years ago, and his comment to me was, you should get out of compliance.
Hi, my name is Wendy Cusick. I'm currently with Connections Medical, trauma and extremities company, but prior to that, I was with a local company called Spinology for about 15 years. So I've spent most of my time in spine, orthopedics, and trauma, and have been working with Mark for a very long time on the regulatory side. I mean, at least 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of good guidance over the years.
Thank you. I'm going to start with you, Janelle, with the first question. So based on the sessions today, great job everyone on those. What recent enforcement trend are you most concerned about, and how is your organization responding to it? And by the way, today, these are all their comments, their personal comments, not representing their organizations necessarily.
I like how you disclaim us out of the box. So there is no rest for the weary, is one of the things that became really clear. Like, despite what may look like not great organization and a sense that's a little chaotic, it does seem clear that enforcement efforts are continuing in this area, and we need to be careful and vigilant. One of the things that we're going to do at my organization is we're going to pick up and we're going to poke and prod around at our speaker programs again, because that's a place where there seems to be some effort and energy. One of the things that I have long been intrigued by and interested in is the Open Payments / Sunshine Act. I remember sitting locked in my house in 2020, I think it was September, and seeing the Medtronic case. It was $8 million for kickbacks and $1 million for what I think was the first prosecution under the Sunshine Act that came out. And that is such a treasure trove of data. And now with AI in place, I can only imagine what somebody could do parsing through it. So I think that's kind of an interesting area that I was thinking about today as we were talking about the FTC and what it was looking at doing with AI, and so AI in that space. And then another area that we've been thinking about that is in the undertones of the discussions this morning is fair market value everything, right? What do you have for fair market value, and how are you substantiating it and using it? Are the thoughts that came to mind.
Thank you. Anything to add, Bryan or Wendy, to that?
I'd add, and I agree with Janelle. I think even without the chaotic environment in D.C., it would be reasonable to anticipate there to be a return of a pendulum, even if there were some change in enforcement attitude by the current administration. And recently, as recent as a couple of weeks ago, right, there was reemphasis for healthcare compliance generally as a priority area for the Department of Justice. So even with the chaos that exists, what remains a focus for the DOJ is healthcare compliance in the areas in which we all dabble. Specific areas in our company that we're continuing to pay attention to, Janelle's examples are great ones, the speaker programs, excellence programs, things like that. Anytime the business is looking to designate and identify any of our customers as being special for some reason, and with that comes some recognition, right? You need to be careful and scrutinize the criteria that are used and how that's communicated, whether it's communicated through the corporate teams or hopefully not through the sales organizations, and minimizes their involvement in how those programs are administered. But generally the enforcement environment, while in certain areas there may be some chaos and lessened attention for healthcare compliance, it remains a priority.
I echo those sentiments, of course. In my particular field, the use of 1099s and distributors is commonplace. It is the rule and not the exception. And so managing the relationships with those sales agents is always tricky, not only in how they are being compensated, but in their behaviors as well. And in the small to mid-sized companies, there tends to be a tendency to want to just look away, and what you don't know can't hurt you. But with the increased spotlight on these activities and these cases coming out, it's figuring out ways to put systems in place to get the right disclosure from these third-party distributors, to understand where they're spending their money, and to get our internal sales managers to understand that we're responsible ultimately for that behavior. And this is not necessarily a new risk, but it's a refocused risk with the way the enforcement trends are going. And there's been, ever since I've gotten into this, I think the government has sort of felt like they did a decent job with pharma and kind of getting a handle on how the pharma reps are paid. And they've had their bullseye on the device reps, right? And they've wanted these device reps to get off these commission plans. They want vending machines in the OR where you just, and that's just not realistic. And it's not safe for the patients either. There's a reason these device reps are in the rooms a lot of the times. So managing that risk and balancing that is a big focus.
Yeah, that's a great point about the device reps. I was actually a former product manager and worked a lot with sales reps in the field, and would cover cases where I was a guest in the OR or cath lab. And on many occasions, I saw them helping the physician, pointing things out that maybe the physician or scrub nurse or whomever just didn't see in it. There's a great value that they add to the patient safety, in my view. Next question, I'll toss this over to you, Bryan. How do you balance legal risk with the business's desire to move quickly on product development and market expansion? So businesses always want to move fast, right?
Oh my God. Always want to move fast, and hyper fast when you're in a smaller, fast-paced, high-growth company like mine. And just for background, for those that aren't familiar, Inspire was founded as a spin-out of technology and products from Medtronic in 2007. All pre-commercial, still at the time in clinical stage and working through the regulatory process. Ultimately got FDA approval in 2014. First products were sold in 2015. The company went public in 2018. I joined in 2021, January 2021, and we had just finished 2020 with 115 million in revenue.
Wow.
That was just 4.5 years ago.
It's a great market space you're in.
Right. And in 2024, we announced and had revenue of a little bit over 800 million.
Wow.
So in the span of 4 years, we've grown. I don't know what that compounded annual growth rate, I'm just a dumb lawyer, but the growth is exceptional. And with that, comes all the pressures of fast-paced product development teams and marketing teams that want to do more and all of those types of things. And so the risks and our role as lawyers and compliance professionals to oversee and work with those teams just continues to get more complex and evolves as the business continues to grow. My personal view is ways in which we can support the business and help to manage the risk is to do what we all know and what we all talk about, but we all recognize you could always do a better job, which is integrate the legal and compliance teams into the product development teams as early as possible and throughout the entire process. So, right, you don't want to just be in the very first kickoff meeting and then show up, 6 to 12 months later once the product team is committing to a certain design. But stay connected. Figure out ways to stay connected. Work with the leaders in the organization who have responsibility for governance and decision making to figure out how you can establish appropriate governance structures through the process, whether it's a committee that includes legal and compliance representatives that meet periodically to talk through issues that the design team is facing. But by all means, avoid the scenario where you're called in weeks before, right? The submission needs to go to FDA, or weeks before the contemplated launch of a product to sort of wrestle to the ground significant issues. That's certainly a big piece of it. I also sort of couple that with any risk management has to be aligned with a well thought through assessment of where to focus, like a risk assessment, right? Not all risks are created equal. Not all areas associated with product design are going to present the same level of risk and magnitude to the organization. And so you need to be thoughtful around where and how to focus your energy and where are the areas where you can accept a degree of risk beyond what generally might be thought of versus areas where you just simply can't tolerate the risk. And just by way of a general comment, this is an area where I would say we are continuing to have discussion, and I haven't figured out exactly how to engage with the organization generally on risk management. It's super easy in the context of a single decision, a single issue on the table to reach a conclusion and accept the risk associated with that. The challenge I think most organizations have, including my own, is when you think about risk in the aggregate, right? So that you've accepted a level of risk in one area, in area A, area B, you've got a certain level of risk, and before you know it, if you haven't thought about it in the aggregate, your overall risk profile, likely or may exceed, the appetite that the organization has for risk. So you have to somehow work into how you think about risk, this idea of cumulative aggregated risk across the organization rather than for any specific decision to sort of advising on the risk and then making a decision. I think eventually that you'll run into issues with that approach.
Excellent points. Yeah, no, it's so many good points in there. But yeah, we've all been a part of those conversations where maybe the commercial's shot or whatever it is, and you're brought in at the 11th hour and you're like, whoa, sorry. So to your point, getting in early and being that advocate for the team is critical. Anything to add, Wendy or Janelle?
Great answer.
It really was. I mean, I think the only other nuance I would add to that is the relationship building that happens in the course of that and making it clear to the team, in particular the commercial team, that you are their ally and their advocate and not their enemy. And I think the sooner you can establish that relationship, that you're there to remove obstacles from them, to keep everybody out of orange and not necessarily to put roadblocks in front of them, that will move mountains in the long run.
I think it's a great point. And the smart commercial folks will figure that out quickly too and say, how can I work with my legal and regulatory colleagues? Because they're ultimately, I need to convince them that what I'm doing is okay.
Can I just add a nuanced points to Wendy's really good comment? I encourage, and I'm looking across the room and not directly at folks from Inspire, but I've got a table full of folks from Inspire here. And I think they would vouch for the conversations that we've had similar to what Wendy just described, where we don't consider ourselves apart from the team. We are part of the team. It just happens to be that we've got background in law and compliance, and that's our area of expertise. But we are as accountable to helping the business achieve its goals, right? And I think that's a big part of what Wendy just said. If you show up and all you say is, hey, look, here's the law, here are the issues, it's your decision, then that creates a separation between you and a mentality that the business folks have that you're perhaps not accountable to the fact that a no decision or a decision where you've got to go and do some type of redesign impacts them, but it doesn't necessarily impact you, right? Because you're just calling balls and strikes. So that's, to me, how you show up, how you engage is critical, being part of the team.
Thank you. Thank you. Wendy, I'm going to jump over to you. And we have a list of questions here. This is a great conversation, by the way. I hope we can get through most of these, but I'm going to jump down the list of ways to what's one compliance or legal risk that you think is underappreciated right now in the medtech industry? And I know we talked about food and drugs today, but we've got a lot of medtech folks I know online and here in the room. So if you don't mind tackling that one, Wendy.
Well, I mean, I think with the exception of Paul, probably, the cybersecurity issue, I think, is huge. And we talked about this just for a second when we were speaking. And I think that there's obvious things. You know, if you are in an implantable that has a software component to it, you're probably a little bit more attuned to this, right? And I think there's things like HIPAA. But Paul did a great job diving into how scary this gets fast for all of us. And I think we're really woefully unprepared for it generally as a bar, if you will, as a group of professionals, if you will. I think understanding how AI is going to impact this, we're all collecting data more and more frequently, whether it's from a clinical trial, whether it's post-market surveillance, whether it is actual biofeedback from the devices itself. The amount of data we're collecting in this industry is staggering. And I think we're just in its infancy in figuring out how we're going to use it, how we're going to share it, what's okay, what's not okay. The rules are evolving as well. And so I just think as an industry, we're all trying to get our arms around it. I certainly don't have any answers, but I'm aware that this is an issue.
I so agree with you. And I think the other thing that we like to do and take comfort in, it's the way we've handled things in this past, like, oh, I'll hire somebody and I'll have a specialist over here. And you think like, oh, in this organization, you're going to have this one person that's going to take care of all of this for you. And I'm coming to believe, and I love you enthusiastically laughing and agreeing with me, I think.
He's the one person I hired.
Yeah, okay. That's why he's laughing. I think what we need to start doing is telling everyone, this is all of our jobs. No one area, no one person can do this, and everybody has to develop this savvy because it's going to take all of us.
Nothing to add, really. I mean, I'm happy. I know Mark was concerned because I just showed up a few minutes before the panel just started. But that was intentional because I wanted to avoid Paul's very scary commentary around data privacy and cybersecurity issues and concerns. I've got nothing to add. I completely agree with the comments from the others. Excellent,
excellent. Janelle, I'm going to come back to you. How are you leveraging compliance training to reduce internal risk, and what's actually working with your teams? Maybe what's not working, if you'd like to talk about that.
So one of my favorite things about compliance, and this actually caught me by surprise, is training. I absolutely love training. I apparently love acting. I love if I can do a training and afterwards, or lead a training, or my team does a training or whatever, and afterwards people come up and say, that was the best compliance training, or that was so much fun, or I can't, like, that is just this huge payoff, because what that means is people aren't training. They're learning something, they're getting to know something. And so I spend a lot of time, probably some would say too much time, but I think it's super fun, working on trying to come up with creative trainings. One of my favorite trainings was came out of the Acclarent off-label case, and I was new and I had just started at this company, and I went in to meet the sales leadership team and turned it into a closing argument in an off-label case prosecuting this company. And that group there were, I don't know, 30 of them in the room. I'd never met most of them before, and they were rapt. And I finished, and I was all excited, and I was like, wow. And I heard quietly somebody goes, "Are we in trouble?" And it was just, and afterwards, what somebody said to me was, "You made me feel like crap." And afterwards, I realized I never want to feel that way, and that made a difference. And so all the things that we can do to make people feel something during the training, to lean in and really, I've had fun with this. And one of the things I'm thinking about lately, as everybody's doing more with less and faster, is trying to incorporate more bursts of training. Not you have to come for an hour session, but what can I send out, right? Mm-hmm. Here, if you submit this response to this, you'll automatically, whether you're right or wrong, get in this thing for $200 gift card if you complete the exercise. And what can you learn? And people realize, some of them, they don't know what they're doing, right? So when you say, here's the follow-up session, join this short call and we'll explain it, they'll join the session. But what are you guys doing?
I love that. And I especially like the aspect of your description of the importance of training and how when people have gone through a session, they don't realize that they were training and how it just simply connects to their job. And I think that applies to all aspects of it, whether it's how the training itself and the materials for training are delivered, even our policies, right? We need to work, and if we are honest, we lawyers and compliance professionals, we love policies, but these things don't exist for us. They exist so that folks on our team throughout the organization can read and comprehend and get the information that they need to successfully do their jobs. And if it's written in a way that it's only going to be understood by lawyers or in other convoluted ways, then we're standing in the way of helping people understand what they need to know to do their job successfully. So I think that's a critical component of it as well. I love this burst training idea, and I'm benefiting from, I've got a table full of folks over here to my left that are hearing all of these ideas real time, and I get to endorse them in front of them.
I would echo that too, and I think real time is another thing that's important. One of the most entertaining, annual compliance I did was the oldie but goodie, the Hall of Shame, where you trot out all the nonsense, right, anonymized,
all the emails,
all the nonsense, and the sales reps love nothing more than trying to figure out who did what, and no one wants to be up there. And it's a great sense of accomplishment by the time you're done with that, because everyone is but along with the burst training in that same vein is real time. So when something happens, we had a product that was sold commercially off label for almost 15 years. So you can imagine the nonsense there. When it got its de novo grant and we were able to market, there was actually more nonsense, because it's easy to say you just can't promote. Now all of a sudden, when you can promote, there's a lot more to do. And we had a sales call where someone was raising issues, and I think as frequently as you can, attack them right after it happens. You just said a whole pile of bad, and I need to undo this, to do some sort of burst training immediately after that while you have their attention is fantastic. And again, I'm in small, mid-sized organizations, so we can be a little bit more nimble in that regard, but it's effective, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. It can be really effective because a lot of times something happens, the sales force, they might be talking about it, depending on the situation. So you can take advantage of telling them all at once, hey, we need to retrain. Maybe even, depending on the situation, you have a heavy hand or a lighter hand, but it can be a great opportunity to strike while iron's hot, if you will. All right, Bryan, I'm going to come back to you. So looking ahead to the next 12 months, it's hard to believe we're almost halfway through 2025 already, but what are you watching closely, whether it's legislative, regulatory, or enforcement related?
I would say, and we've already touched on it a bit, the general sense of enforcement trends, where the areas of focus for the regulator is going to be. Where's the state of maturity of our compliance program relative to where those areas of interest might be, and the things that we can do over the short and near term to augment and get better as quick as possible, and support the business, right? Because the business is growing and it's changing, and all of those things that we've already talked about. And so it's always a challenge to stay in front and to allow the maturity of the compliance program match where the business is, but that's the ask, that's the goal. One of the things also that is, I think, forefront for a lot of us, and Janelle mentioned this earlier, is artificial intelligence, right? And AI can be used by regulators to enhance their oversight and view of what companies are doing, but there's even an expectation now, I think most of us appreciate, for companies to utilize artificial intelligence as part of our monitoring environment, right? And so, I've got situations now where, had we made different choices over the course of an investigation to utilize AI type tools, we might have learned things that would have led to perhaps a different conclusion in the investigation. That's not bad per se, but again, that expectation on the part of regulators that companies like ours make use of these tools to, bring to bear and have as part of your compliance programs effective oversight and monitoring is just going to be important for us. And those tools are evolving and growing, and the ways in which you might leverage them will continue to grow as well. So,
Good comment. One of the things that I've been thinking about, you mentioned effective compliance program, right? And that's one of those things that always makes me want to roll my eyes, right? Because no, I'm trying to run an ineffective, of course I'm trying to run an effective compliance program, right? But I was looking at I think it's 2020, November of 2023, OIG guidance on an effective compliance program. And I think there's something like 300 and however many shoulds in that document, and you can take that document and you can divide it up and you could say the CEO should, the board should, the compliance officer should, the compliance committee should, and employees should. And I think in some respects, maybe some people are doing this already, but I'm toying with the idea of what would happen if you take that document and you evaluate it against, because I hate this idea of hiring somebody to come in and learn all of these things about my company and then just tell me, right? So how can we audit and look at our effectiveness and learn from it ourselves? And so that's just an idea I thought I'd share.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah, I can only imagine some of the tools the government's now using for discovery. Back in the day, it was like we took the servers and we have all your emails, and now it would probably take seconds. Find the most damning emails out of these billion emails, or maybe not billion, but a lot of emails, and I would imagine it'd do a pretty good job probably finding them. So
some of us made a really good living in litigation world reading paper documents not all that long ago. So it's amazing.
Yeah, no, right. Okay, I'm going to flip it over to you, Wendy, and talk a little bit about the FDA. In the evolving FDA regulatory landscape, what's one thing your team is doing differently this year compared to last?
I mean, come on, right? Going slow is what we're doing because nobody has any idea. The company that I'm currently at right now has tendon repair products that are cleared for the hand and the wrist. They're pretty awesome, actually. But they very much want to move to foot and ankle and tendon to tendon Achilles repair and stuff. But we are at a little bit of a hang on. What on earth is going on over there? And not even considering doing anything without pre-subs first. I mean, it just feels like we don't know what's going on. I think you're going to see probably a lot more business, Mark. Right? I think we're going to be depending on outside counsel a lot more and getting these opinions about what to expect, because that's what it feels like. So it's almost like a go slow to go fast. I think there's some trepidation. There's a lot of concern about missteps and what's going to happen. And that's not even taking into account the discussion from earlier about the staffing and the AI and all of that, but how the the rule changes are going to affect things. I just feel like there's so much unknown that we're at a little bit of a pause.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I know earlier the group talked about what you take away 10 regulations, Nate, for every new one, and I'm not really sure how that's going to work. But yeah, so it's an interesting environment right now. Anything else to add on the FDA front?
I want to know how Wendy is successful in convincing the business to slow down.
Yeah, you guys will have to talk at
Money.
PR about that.
Money. We don't want to waste money.
Yeah.
Right? That was the bottom line. Budget.
We have a team who's reporting every time they engage and telling, and then reporting out what we can expect next. And so far, they're braced, right? But so far, they haven't reported that they've encountered huge problems, but they're ready for it and trying to plan ahead. Yeah,
that's not to speak for the team, but I know they put out an alert that reviewed data for timelines not too long ago, and they're still the same, but it's still early days, so early innings. So we'll see where things.
And I should say, just as a point of clarification too, in my very specific case, there's a hope that we might not have to do some clinical work.
Sure.
And so with the changing in the regulations, we might avoid it. So that is part of the leg
But
too.
that whole strategy is premised again on trying to go as fast as possible. Avoid doing the clinical because that will delay the timing of getting the submission in. But I think it is still a partnership, right? We talked about this earlier, partnership and working with the appropriate functional teams in the organization to figure out the right strategy and understand, the consequences of the various decisions that you're making, right? And risk ultimately if the regulator decides that you do need clinical data, right? And what does that mean? Well, you're going to add 2 years to the overall timeline. And you just want everybody to make those decisions eyes wide open, rather than it being made in an organization where it's everything is funneled through a single person or a single functional group without the benefit of real cross-functional input.
Yeah, great points. All right, I'm going to come back, Janelle, to you here. So talking a little bit about corporate culture. When you see regulators focusing more on corporate culture, some of the cases highlighted by Man and Katie earlier, how do you promote a culture of compliance without being the Department of No?
So this is my leadership team, right? Giving my leadership team the opportunity to be the compliance leaders so that the teams are getting the message from all sides. This isn't the compliance department. This is all of us, I think. And so giving them the opportunities to look really good and clear messaging and share with them, I think is the best one I can think of. And that's worked pretty well.
Do you ever scare them into compliance, or are they just into it?
So, you know what? They're into it. Like, it's pride in the company. We are, I know a lot of us are, right? But patients first, like if you really mean patients first, that makes compliance a whole lot easier. And so when you've got people talking the talk and walking the walk, it kind of comes naturally. And so if you just coach them and give them the opportunities, they go.
I scare them. I mean, I think I've had a lot more success with the internal group and rallying around patients first and safety and efficacy for the folks that are in the building. For the folks that are on the street selling it, sometimes you just have to be the big bad wolf. And they have to know that there's consequences. But again, I spent a lot of time in spine, and the gross generalization there is they are cowboys. So,
Cowgirls too, right?
I mean, a couple. I use that word on purpose. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple cowgirls, but it is mostly cowboys, even in 2025. And so you do, especially, I mean, frankly, being a woman in that position, you do have to be a little with that group of people. But the other thing that I've found to be really helpful, and in particular with the rise of the key TAM suits, you mentioned being a product manager. Very often, the folks that are the product managers, the folks that are the med ed, admin assists, they get mad and they get disgruntled when the rules aren't being followed, when they feel like they're being asked to do something that seems a little shady. So pay attention to those people and make sure they know they can talk to you, make sure they know you're taking their concerns seriously, make sure they feel seen by you and heard by you, and that you are taking this seriously. The leadership team is walking the walk and taking it seriously, but very often it's those folks that end up picking up the phone. And so to just sort of be mindful of them and inclusive of that group, I think is important.
Well, such a great point. And part of the question, Mark, you use the word culture. And in my past, I had the opportunity to dabble in HR. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about culture and have come to appreciate that culture is more than just a word. It's more than a handful of values that you might put on a fancy placard and post on the wall. It really is, at the end of the day, the behaviors of the individuals in the organization, primarily leadership, I would say, because the leaders in the organizations are the ones that cast the shadow and drive what others are paying attention to. And so that circles back to what both Janelle and Wendy have said, which is the importance of when there is an issue, you have to take action. Because by the time, candidly, my experience tells me that by the time it gets to my desk, I am not the last person to know, but I'm near the last person to know, which means there are a lot of people in the organization that are aware. They saw that sales rep do something that they had no business doing, and perhaps the sales rep is talking with other sales reps about how they did X, Y, and Z, and then it gets to your desk. And the people that are hearing it, that are trying to follow the rules and do the right thing, they're wondering, what the hell's going on? Where's leadership? Where are the consequences to this type of behavior if the value is compliance is not an option, which is one of ours, right? Then how can you tolerate, how can you stand up for that? And so we've got to have the courage to assure that the behaviors that the behaviors that people are demonstrating in the organization are aligned with our expectations and our values. And if they're not, even if it means tough decisions, you've got to be prepared to make those tough calls.
Yeah, no, great points.
Can I make
Please
one
do.
more tiny
Yes.
point? Another thing that I think some of us are up against or have seen is this idea that if somebody raises an issue, they're ratting somebody out. And we've done a lot of work to say, no, that is pride in our organization. That is making sure that we are doing the right things the right way. And when you're doing that, you are standing up for the organization and trying to kind of flip that idea on its head and make it more of a positive as opposed to some sort of disloyalty to somebody. And that's been really effective.
Yeah, no, great points. And I do agree, like, sometimes you have to, sometimes it's sugar and sometimes it's spice, right? And in our rules, it's often more spice, but showing.
And it's knowing your people too,
Yeah.
right? It's knowing your people. I mean, if you're in a small to mid-sized company, you actually know the people. And so you know who needs the sugar and who needs the spice.
But it is a good reminder for them, and you all can use this in your work. Sometimes people need to be reminded that they are personally liable. We act as contract counsel often for startups that don't have the budget to have an FTE, and we will need to remind certain people you're personally on the hook here for the misbranding or the kickbacks. And the kickbacks aren't just for your liability in the companies, it's the recipient. And just offering it is a violation of the law. So but at the same time, as we talked about earlier, trying to work with them so that they don't feel like you're just sales prevention, that you're just the culture of no, that you're there to protect them. You're there to protect the company, but also them, and keep everybody out of orange, as Wendy pointed out. So great comments there. And I do remember, too, as a product manager, when the AVMED code went into place, I was at EV3, and I was so happy because I didn't have to deal with pens or reps telling me that the pen that I picked out wasn't something that they liked. So we're getting close to time here. I'm looking through my list to see if there's anything else. I guess I'm going to come back to privacy one more time. I know that was a hot topic today. And just curious if there's any more tidbits you have on, and maybe with Wendy, I don't know that your products really are collecting patient data, but the question is, with data privacy compliance when products generate or process patient data. If you're approaching that with auditing or are using software tools to make sure that the interactions are compliant, any tidbits to offer the audience there as that area evolves and really unfolds?
Mine are, you're probably more.
I got to be careful because I just left a conversation not too long ago on this very topic with that gentleman there. I keep pointing to my team, and I'm going to have to apologize to them later. But I largely consistent with what we've already described. For privacy, it's what I just mentioned for risk and product development teams, and integrating, the privacy personnel into the design team to help make sure that you're thinking about privacy up front. It's sort of the idea of privacy by design, right? It's incorporated into the design of the product up front, rather than something that's added to it either later in the development stage or perhaps even later than that. You're doing the risk assessment, right? Because again, you can't do everything. You can try to do everything, but I think if you do that, you're going to end up in a situation where perhaps not everything is done well. And so being very clear in terms of where the risks are and the things that you can do to mitigate those risks as reflected in the design of the product. And then the idea of partnership as well, just being available and integrated into the teams and being accountable to ultimately helping the business be successful.
Great, thank you. Last question, because I know Charlie's showing me we're just about at time here, and I'll just maybe a quick response from all of you, starting with you, Wendy. So there's been more DOJ, OIG activity, as Amanda reported earlier. We're at record highs for whistleblower cases. And if you violate the False Claims Act, if you violate the AKS, you violate the FCA. It's written into the law. Has that changed how you structure commercial agreements or physician interactions? How your salespeople
yes and no.
interacts?
I'll be quick. I mean, one, I'm going to go back and reiterate to this, the sort of key TAM prevention to the best you can with the relationship with your internal employees. But key to this too is the relationships with the HCPs. Because let's face it, none of us would pay these people if we didn't have to. Right? We're not like trying to spend our budget paying physician consultants. They want to be paid, right? So having that conversation with, in my case, these spine surgeons who have very lofty ideas of how much they should be paid per hour, making them understand the risk it poses to them as well.
Anything to add? Closing comments on this question?
Well said.
I think meeting those safe harbors is critical, and something we've done for several clients. Submitting an advisory opinion they've been pretty quicker than in the past. I've had some take many months, almost 2 years, but I think the last couple we've submitted have been around like 7 to 12 months or so. So using the OIG as a resource is also a good idea, because if you give them all the facts and they sign off on your program, the likelihood that you're going to have an issue is quite low. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. Please join me in thanking them, and I'm going to hand it over to Daria.